It's really around what's that coordination structure going to look like? How do we get clarity around the roles, the intentions, the goals of the family office? Well, as far as what we stand for, we really want to make sure that there's an aligned philanthropic impact association to say, how do we have that impact that's differentiated from just check writing philanthropy? Because we want to make sure that the philanthropy is coordinated with the tax folks, the estate planning, as well as also the investment strategy. Because impact is a system, it's not an event. And so we really want to look at it and say, how, in most cases, can we get as much as a 5 to 20 times impact on the causes you care about? So that's something we look at there. And some of the ways that we can define that is going to be taking a look at, is it the gifting of highly appreciated assets? Is it the gifting of ownership shares before you exit the business? It can be much better to give those types of assets away the day before you sell the business instead of the day after you sell the business. We also take a look at what are some of the things that can give you gift multipliers. For example, we see that with the gift of life insurance, where you're trading pennies for dollars. We also see that with certain tax credit strategies, where if there's something where you can stack tax credits and tax deductions together, in some cases, we've seen scenarios where, in that particular case, someone may be able to get back as much as 83 cents on every dollar that they give. And so, if that's the case, if you can get back 83 cents on every dollar you give through tax credits and tax deduction strategies, if you're comfortable giving $10,000, why not give $70,000? Because that feels like 10,000 because you're going to get 60,000 of it back. How much more good can you do with that? So we look at those kind of components. And we also take a look at and say which assets are going to be very heavily taxed as part of the gifting strategy. So, for example, especially when we're looking at family offices and estates that are going to be north of the estate tax threshold of roughly 15 million, what we find there is that with a proper gifting strategy, we can unload some assets that can be incredibly heavily taxed. So, for example, we see some folks that may have retirement accounts. And because of the new 10-year distribution rules that came out a few years ago, there's a lot of assets that have to be forced out over a 10-year period of time. So we no longer have lifetime capabilities to spread out the income over our heirs' lifetime. So if there's a heavily taxed retirement account like a 401k, IRA, or others like that, then what we find there is because of those distribution rules, not only can it be included in the estate where it may be subject to a 40% federal tax, and depending on the state you're in, a subsequent estate or inheritance tax on top of that. But now the heirs have to take those distributions out within 10 years. And in some worst case scenarios, we've seen that as much as 77% can get lost just on the transfer. And in that particular case, we had one gentleman who was going to have about $20 million in these types of accounts, and close to 16 million would get lost on the taxes if there was not a restructuring of it. So we're firm believers you have better ideas of what you'd like to do with those funds than the IRS. And so we encourage you to have those kinds of design conversations and say, where would you like to have impact? With what people and what causes? Because again, impact is a system, it's not an event. And there are ways that you can get these multiplied impacts and really unleash the values that your family stands for. Well, in summary, some of the key things that we look at is when it comes to family office planning, it's really around what's that coordination structure going to look like? How do we get clarity around the roles, the intentions, the goals of the family office? And then how do we start to design the systems? Because again, it's about systems, it's not about products. There may be solutions that get implemented across multiple advisors, but we need to make sure how do they all fit together? In the same way, when I used to work with aircraft, one of the things that emerged in the 90s was the approach of having more modular systems where you could plug and play so that they could interact with each other and not have to completely redesign an entire aircraft. As part of what we want to understand is what is that interoperability of the systems that we're putting together? Because you may have a very distributed solution set, but if it all fits and you have someone that's quarterbacking all of that, it can come together quite nicely. Because the whole focus here is around making life simpler for the family office and its members, not making it more complex. And so I hope this conversation has brought you clarity. That's exactly what this channel is for. And would love for you to subscribe to the channel for more clarity driven insights on wealth, impact, and legacy. And we look forward to seeing you in the next video.